Good morning, everybody. This is a live severe weather briefing as the SBC has upgraded the risk to enhanced southeastern Arkansas across northern Mississippi, northern Alabama, even into middle Tennessee, even northern Georgia and eastern Tennessee late tonight through the early morning hours. Tomorrow could see that tornado risk animated back below there. That's the 3-kilometer NAM reflectivity. That's the 12Z model run. And you can certainly see that boundary that sets up over northern Mississippi, and that's going to be the warm frontal zone that we are going to be interested in targeting. There you can see the enhanced risk that stretches from eastern Arkansas across northern Mississippi, northern Alabama, into middle Tennessee. And I do think that there is going to be a complicating factor with the forecast, which is this precipitation here that is just hammering the Tupelo area. There you can see Tupelo back to the southwest, Bruce, all the way down through Greenwood, back toward the Greenville area. Basically just some showers and thunderstorms here, morning showers and thunderstorms. These do not have tornado potential yet, but this is acting to at least solidify that boundary, and it could even shift that tornado threat just a little bit south, depending on where this warm front ends up residing. But it is difficult to tell exactly how this early morning convection is going to impact the target area. The 12ZHRRR seems to have the best handle on this morning convection, and it seems to have the target area just a little bit further south, kind of along the southern gradient of this precipitation. But this should lift out off to the northeast during the early morning hours, and I do expect convective initiation to happen over south central Arkansas, southeastern Arkansas, maybe down near down to the north of Bastrop, down into northeastern Louisiana, and then those should track off to the northeast through this zone, right along this corridor through northern Mississippi, and that will continue into northern Alabama as well. I definitely do agree with that upgrade to an enhanced risk, certainly. The tornado probabilities are at 10% there. No hatch area for significant tornadoes, but I have a hard time believing that if a tornado does happen just ahead of that surface low, that it's just going to be a weak tornado capped below EF2 or below. Strong tornado EF2 or EF3 with that hatch area. But I think that if a tornado does happen with a supercell along that surface low track, then it is going to have a very high likelihood of being a damaging tornado as well. Here's the loop of the EHI, 0 to 1 kilometer EHI. And look at that boundary across northern Mississippi. Basically the northern gradient of that surface-based instability. That's where that subtle surface low is going to track. And look at that little ripple in that boundary as it ripples up. That's as that surface low tracks off to the east. It's going to have a little bit of a pop in that low-level jet and a little bit of an increase in the southerly flow just above the ground. And that's what causes that little bit of a kink just within that boundary. Here you can see that kink just ahead of the surface low, pretty close to the Mississippi River at about 20Z, 2 to 3 p.m. This is about when I expect these storms to initiate, and the nose of this low-level jet backs right up to that boundary, which is going to be draped from southeastern Arkansas across northern Mississippi, northern Alabama, and definitely that precipitation that you're seeing moving through Tupelo is going to have an impact on this forecast. The 3-kilometer NAM does not have it as prominently, and the HRRR does seem to depict that band of morning convection moving into the Tupelo area. There you can see that morning convection right here. So it does seem that the HRRR model does have at least a little bit of a handle on this convection here moving into the Tupelo area. And so you do wonder how that is going to impact the evolution of instability during the day today. So let's take a look at the surface-based CAPE. And there is just a little bit of CAPE even feeding this convective line so far this morning. And it does definitely impede just a little bit that moisture transport, but a majority of the CAPE is streaming up through southwestern Mississippi along that Mississippi River Valley. And look at that, the CAPE does eventually arrive here south of the boundary. That convection moves through northeastern Mississippi, stabilizing the atmosphere. But then the instability arrives to the southwest, up through the Mississippi River Valley, southeastern Arkansas into northern Mississippi there. This is at 16Z. We step forward to 18Z. which is about noon. And look at that instability building up. This is where those storms are going to initiate. A nice pocket of instability here, northeastern Louisiana, southeastern Arkansas, into western Tennessee, western Mississippi, and by 18Z, you can still see this anvil in northeastern Mississippi. It does look like the precipitation or the surface-based instability does meet up with that anvil shadow, so you have to wonder if even some of this early convection here could struggle to become surface-based across northeastern Mississippi. But I think this is going to be the main event back here within that Cape blob. You can see a couple of those bubblers trying to develop to the west of Grenada. But I could certainly see these by about 19 to 20Z being the event, and I may want to position a little bit further northwest. The concern with that are if these renegades do take off a little bit further east, closer to the Tupelo area. Right now, though, I think that it's going to be this main mode that comes out of southeastern Arkansas, moving into northwestern Mississippi. Looks like it's going to be messy as well. This is at 21Z, so about 3 p.m. Central Time. I want to be on some of these lead storms here, and it's possible some of these renegades could also take off near the Tupelo area. We'll have to keep an eye on those renegades. You don't want to get too far west on this main event back there and then miss a renegade that develops off to the east. But look at that low-level jet surge just ahead of that surface low. 40 to 50 knots right there in red, streaming into those developing storms, moving through northwestern Mississippi, and by 22Z, by about 4 p.m., that thing is ejecting off to the east. Likely will be supercells here across northeastern Mississippi with tornadoes on the ground by this time, by 22Z. And this low-level jet surge right here, just ahead of that surface low, is what's kinking up that boundary up into northeastern Mississippi and northwestern Alabama, and eventually could surge that boundary up into middle Tennessee as well as we get closer to 23Z. Looks like most of that severe weather threat is indeed going to remain just south of the I-40 corridor, but it looks like it could, that nose of the low-level jet could lift all the way up to the Nashville area by 6, 7, 8 p.m. By this time, by 6 p.m., that threat is going to be into northern Alabama. Looks like just to the north and northwest of Tuscaloosa, Birmingham, but still keep an eye down here in the central portion of the state. But that channel right there is that corridor of strongest wind shear just ahead of that surface low, and it's moving into northeastern Alabama by 7 p.m. So this is going to be quite a progressive system. Notice how the 1 kilometer winds shift to a more westerly direction across northwestern Alabama. This is basically going to shut down that threat of substantial tornadoes once those 1 kilometer winds shift over to a westerly direction back behind it. Northeastern Alabama here, right at the nose of that, likely will be tornado producers in northeastern Alabama. Big photographs out ahead of that. And eventually, though, this surface low is going to move into this relatively stable air that is across northeastern Alabama and northern Georgia. But I still think there's going to be that tornado threat moving into northern Georgia late. That's going to be at 10 or 11 p.m. You still have that surge in the low-level jet pushing across northern Georgia. Let's take a look at what the surface-based instability looks like out there. And notice how that instability really tails off as you get toward 9 or 10 p.m. across northeastern Alabama into northern Georgia. So that could be the saving grace out there across northern Georgia, is that there is a lot of stable air in place. Northern Georgia, northeastern Alabama, and eventually that surface low is going to outrun this boundary back behind it. But by 23Z, you can certainly see this boundary all the way up northeastern Mississippi to northwestern Alabama. One thing I do notice, though, with this 12Z HRRR is it does look like the instability is a little bit carved out across northern Mississippi, and that's because of the early morning convection that's moving through this area. But it still does have a stripe of convection, some instability stretching from northeastern Louisiana out ahead of that surface low across northern Mississippi. But boy, it doesn't quite tap in very effectively into that Cape blob, and that's because we still have a relatively flat upper level system that is causing this severe weather threat. But they are going to be initiated by this little wedge of instability that surges up through the Mississippi River Valley. But look at that stable air in place across northern Mississippi. That's because of this convection that is dominating this morning, feeding into that Tupelo area, but it does try to build in a nice Cape blob here, southeastern Arkansas into western Mississippi. This is where those storms are going to fire, and they should track right along that boundary. That's going to be reinforced by this convection, but it definitely is a complicated setup, a little bit more messy, and it's being made even more messy by this abundant convection that is moving into the Tupelo area right now. A lot of precipitation. This could help to solidify that boundary, and then as we go through the afternoon with that southwesterly low-level jet feeding into it. But I do think that it also could help push this boundary a little bit further south and encourage a little bit of a further south track of that surface low with all this convection. That surface low is definitely going to track along that boundary. And with an abundance of precipitation moving into the Tupelo area out here, I-55 corridor getting hammered as well with precipitation, that definitely is going to act at the very least to solidify that boundary. But let's take a look at the RAP analysis, the morning RAP mesoanalysis, and see where that's going to be going this morning. So there you can see that instability axis. It is building nicely to the south side of that morning convection. You can see these southerlies streaming northward through the Mississippi River Valley. This is that convection that is outrunning that instability axis as it heads up toward the Tupelo area, running into that stable air. That's why that's not quite surface-based. But it does have this instability building up through the Mississippi River Valley, basically setting the stage for initiation over southeastern Arkansas eventually. And you can see where that subtle surface low is located. With those southeasterly winds streaming into that surface low. Appears that that subtle surface low is located over south central Arkansas right now. And look at those bubblers. It does look like instability is not going to have an issue once those storms move out, at least according to the RAP. See that instability axis just pumping in from the southwest. But the RAP does have that threat of renegades near the Tupelo area by 20Z. That's about 2 to 3 p.m. The RAP seems to hint at more of a cluster, more of a blob coming out of southeastern Arkansas, with those renegades developing out ahead of it, out ahead of the surface low near that Tupelo area in the wake of that morning convection. Let's see how the wind shear is going to change with time as well. And look how that wind shear axis, the 0 to 1 kilometer SRH, just builds up through central into northern Mississippi there, out ahead of that surface low. So that'll say just head up toward Tupelo, monitor that morning convection, see how that morning convection is progressing, and once that clears out, then there should be instability that comes in during a narrow window during early afternoon between about noon and 3 p.m. where it could destabilize. I wonder, though, if that morning convection, well, it looks like it's analyzed pretty well by the RAP. See that convective blob lifting up through northeast Mississippi, eventually to northwestern Alabama, and then you start getting bubblers along that boundary beginning at about 18Z. That's about the midday hour. And then those mature as they head up at about 50 knots east-northeast toward the Tupelo area. And then I'll track those into northwestern Alabama. And then we'll position for the New Year's Eve setup, the New Year's Day severe weather setup. I am going to be deploying gravitrons as well during this setup this afternoon. And I did have a surface map pulled up just so you can see. Got to look at those real observations, of course. And look at all this moisture dominating Mississippi. That moisture has been there since yesterday. There you can see those upper 60s dew points. Jackson, you got a 67 dew point, 71 over 67. And you can see the stable air, upper 60s into Tupelo, but you could definitely see that instability building up through the southwest. Grenada, 71 over 67. Southerly wind starting to advance on the tail end of that convection. So I think we're going to continue to see that destabilization over southeastern Arkansas, far northeastern Louisiana. And this is where I do expect that initiation to happen, and then for those storms to move up pretty close to the Tupelo area, maybe a little bit off to the south with that abundant convection helping to solidify that boundary just a little bit off to the south. But boy, does the wrap not have any problem at all with destabilization. Still relatively early in the day for that precipitation. Wintertime, these wintertime season setups, I do believe that the HRRR handles those low-level thermodynamics the best out of any model, which is why I'm using the HRRR a lot during these wintertime setups. This is the 18Z, or 13Z, HRRR surface-based CAPE, and it does show instability in the wake of that convection building up here in excess of about 2,000 across northwestern Mississippi. You could definitely see that ripple in that surface-based instability just ahead of that surface low. See how this lips up like that? That's because of that increased low-level jet out of the southwest, and you still get those relatively backed or due southerly surface winds out there just ahead of that surface low, and that's where these storms are going to initiate, right within this Cape blob, and then they're going to move northeast and then interact with that warm frontal zone, and that will help to make these photographs even more favorable. Look at these west-southwesterlies back behind, a little bit to the south of that surface low track, but you should have more southerly, weaker surface winds in the vicinity of that surface low track as well. But boy, that convection could disrupt this tornado setup completely, which would definitely be a good thing. Notice how there's a lot of stable air here along that boundary across northeastern Mississippi and northwestern Alabama. That does appear to be a limiting factor for that tornado potential for this setup. Or it could be that the models are just having difficulty resolving how well the atmosphere is going to destabilize in its wake. But that's a pretty stout pocket of stable air here across northeastern Mississippi by 23Z. So what this is telling me is I might want to get a little bit further west toward that Grenada area and then track these off to the east. Instead of just waiting out here in Tupelo. Looks like I'm going to probably have to go west of Tupelo quite a ways, a little bit closer to that instability axis, and then I can rip that west to east corridor. But it is going to be a complicated chase today, everybody. I am going to be streaming live during this entire chase. I got a new streaming device as well, so I'll be streaming live the entire platform and using this to navigate as well as find those tornadoes. I don't want to get into a similar situation like I did in Monette, Arkansas, where I thought I was going east and I was actually going north. Almost ran into that wedge as it was going through the Monette area. So I definitely don't want that to happen again. But thank you, everybody, for tuning in to my weather reports. The Storm Prediction Center did continue that enhanced risk in the 13Z outlook. That enhanced stretches from eastern Arkansas across northern Mississippi, northwestern Alabama, into middle Tennessee as well. But I am a little bit worried about that morning convection. I wonder if that's going to shift the target area, sag it just a little bit further south with this setup. And if that happens, I'm just going to have to adjust my target area a little bit to the southwest of Tupelo, closer to the Grenada area near that I-55 corridor, and then chase those off to the northeast through that forested, hilly terrain of northeastern Mississippi and northwestern Alabama, maybe up into southern Tennessee. But the slight risk barely makes it up into Nashville. So Nashville, you still got to stay tuned. I do think a majority of that severe weather is definitely going to be south of I-40, especially with that morning convection happening this morning that is heading toward the Tupelo area. But I'll be live a little bit later on this morning. Very moist here in Tuscaloosa. I'm actually right near the damage path of where that EF4 tornado came through during the super outbreak, April 27, 2011. And I'm about to head off to the northwest toward the target area. Stay safe, everybody. Stay tuned to those watches and warnings, especially across the enhanced risk area. Multiple days of storm chasing ahead, including, it looks like, tomorrow, maybe down into southeastern Alabama, northern Georgia, maybe even the Piedmont, Carolina, Piedmont. December 31st could have a nocturnal event that develops near Arkansas area into Mississippi. And then on January 1st, that trough ejects Looks like Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, same areas under the gun again as that potent trough ejects, that tandem trough that is dragging that close upper low off of Baja and then dragging it across that warm sector. So we'll also be chasing that event. I'll be keeping you updated on that forecast as well. So stay safe, everybody, and join my lives later on today. Never stop chasing.